welcome to the B4 Business Brunch. And with me this morning, I've got Stephen Frost, Diversity and Inclusion Expert. Stephen, it's LGBT History Month in February, so great to have you on board. Maybe you could just give us a little bit of insight into what you do.
Great, thanks Richard, great to be here, and hi everybody. I work in diversity inclusion and have done for many years since I had a full head of hair. And I write, teach and consult in diversity inclusion, working with some really interesting organisations all around the world. And
what particularly struck me was in your bios that you've taught at the White House before, so that was interesting for you.
Yeah, I must make it clear, it was the administration prior to 2016, just for the avoidance of doubt. But yeah, done a bit of work there. Yeah,
it wasn't your fault then. Excellent. And joining us today, we've got Ian Mundy of UHR Consultancy. Ian, good morning. How are you?
Hi. Good morning, everybody. Yes, fine. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, good.
Do you want to give us a little bit of an outline of what UHR do?
Absolutely. Yeah, UHR Consultancy.
It isn't obvious from the label.
UHR Consultancy provide HR and OD services to SMEs and not-for-profit and the public sector across Oxfordshire and beyond.
Excellent. Thank you, Ian. And Linda, good morning, from Dynamic Coach. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm Linda Hughes. I'll just give you a quick brief of Dynamic Coach Group, which we renamed this week. And I'm really the person that looks after HR in transformation and strategy. And I have a particular interest in inclusion as I'm working with a client on a major work stream on diversity inclusion. So the timing of this conversation is excellent. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much of you to join us. And finally, Megan Carter joining us from Blenheim Palace. Well, probably not from the palace, but
from my kitchen, not as posh as the palace, I'm afraid. Yeah, so Megan from Blenheim, head of HR. So we have a vast business, so three arms to it really. We've got the property side, the estate and the tourism side. And yeah, always interested in inclusion and diversity. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, good to have you here, Megan. And I'm going to stay with you and ask you to put your first question to Stephen this morning.
Oh, I thought I don't have the questions on me.
But Megan.
I do remember them, so you're okay. So the first one was about what would be the one thing that you would do if you could do anything for a business with inclusion. What would be the one and first thing that you would do?
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean, there's some kind of fun, kind of probably slightly dodgy things that spring to mind, but I think properly, if there's one thing I have to do, it would be have a session with the people running the company about what they do and how this can actually benefit what they do. So rather than being a side stream or a kind of Friday afternoon activity, actually how it could absolutely affect the core purpose of their organisation. And it could be a chat, it could be a workshop, it could be a whole day. That's the one thing I would do to start with.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Linda, what's your first question for Stephen?
Well, I'm going to reorder my questions because my last question was what if I was asking you how to advise a company starting their journey, what three things would they do? But you told us one, so perhaps there's two others that you could add to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually there's five, but I'll go through three. I mean, the strategy is the big one. So, building on Megan's question, really, it's about what you do. So, if you, produce products, how can you actually think of diversity in the design stage so that you produce products that work for everybody, not just some people? There's data though. I think measure, your diversity and actually your engagement and how that's progressing in the organisation, because people will know the P&L, they'll know the numbers at the top of their head, but often they don't know their people. And obviously a lot of diversity is invisible, so you need to ask about it. But I think data is really, really important. And then I think a third one is accountability, decision-making, governance stuff. So who's actually responsible for this? It's not just thrown over the fence to HR or to somebody, it's actually everyone's responsibility. It's a core part of leadership. So how can we actually make people accountable for the decisions that they make and the behaviours that they exhibit during the day? And if I'm allowed two more cheeky on the side, it would be leadership and systems, but we'll come on to that.
And you had a question sort of in that line, given that it's LGBT History Month, you had a question regarding leadership and what leaders can do going forward.
Yeah, I suppose for me, what the key actions, I suppose, business leaders can take to take forward the LGBT agenda during this month, but also beyond. So it's consistent and progressive. So just some of those key kind of leadership areas that business can focus on.
Yeah, no, Ian, thanks. I think it's a really important question. Let's be really positive to kick off with, right? If we look back at the last 10 years and how far we've come in LGBT equality, it's really, really positive. If you think about just, even in recent history, we've had a string of legislative changes from adoption rights to employment rights to civil partnership and so forth that have been really, really great, I think. But one of the reasons that's happened and one of the reasons there's been such progress is because most straight people know somebody that's LGBT and they're not scared anymore. It's actually just part of the family, workplace, community, and most people know somebody who's different from them. And it's that actually coming together, that affinity, that actually creates inclusion. And if you look, for example, in other areas like race, where we've still got a lot more work to do, it's still because in comparison, most white folks in 2021 still don't really know someone who's black. And actually that lack of affinity is a real barrier to inclusion. So when it comes to LGBT, I think keep doing good stuff. So keep reaching out and being an ally if you're straight, don't be a bystander. You take on calling out homophobic comments, you take on the kind of burden of making sure that terminology, language, policies are inclusive and don't expect just other people to pick it up who are in a minority. So I think that good stuff, keep doing it. There's also like a really simple exercise you can do. If you think about your closest friends or your closest colleagues, or indeed your neighbours or close people in your life, how many of them are LGBT? And if you don't know anyone, or you don't know anyone, actually, how can you reach out and educate yourself and learn? Because actually getting to know people who are as different from you as you can handle is the best thing you can do for inclusion. So I would say, reach out, ask, include, learn, educate yourself would be the most important thing you can do.
Thank you.
Stephen, does that help you?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
Stephen.
Megan, you have an interesting question about branding and how you portray yourself during LGBT Month and beyond, I presume.
Yeah, obviously all of this is good for employer branding, and not just because of that or paying lip service, but it's genuinely a good business decision to have more diversity, in your organization for so many strengths that it brings. How is the best way to make it known that you are a company that's as diverse as you can be? Obviously there's marketing, but are there any other ways for our employer branding?
I think that's really important, Megan, because I've got quite strong views on this, and I think it kind of goes ultimately to what you do rather than what you say. So this kind of organisation is trying to approach this in three ways. Either what we call Diversity 101, they do it because they have to. It's the Equality Act or the gender pay gap reporting or what have you, and you've got to do it, and that's fine. Or they do it because what we call Diversity 2.0, it's marketing, right? So if you look at the response to Black Lives Matter, the social media was incredible. And you had, amazing brands doing amazing stuff. I mean, you had Nike and Adidas retweeting each other, which was incredible. But the problem with that was that in an age of transparency, investigative journalism and influencers and social media, you scratch beneath that, and actually there's not also a lot of walking the talk necessarily going on. So I think there's a third area, which is really about inclusion, and it's about what you do. And so above and beyond being compliant and having great marketing, it's fundamentally concentrating on that third area about what you do. So for example, how are your people treated and what's the reviews like on Glassdoor? What's your attrition rate like compared with your recruitment rate? Where are you recruiting? What are your job descriptions saying? How are you rewarding performance? What's your gender pay gap? It's what you do that ultimately becomes word of mouth and the most powerful, valuable marketing channel possible, which is what your people say about you and what your customers say about you. And if that matches your marketing, you're onto a winner. But ultimately, it's more important than the marketing alone. Thank
you. Yes.
And Linda, talking about words, I mean, you have an interesting question for Stephen around sort of terminology.
Yeah, I read quite a lot over the weekend in kind of looking at the questions I wanted to ask you, and excuse me for being a little bit radical sometimes, but In the term of, I'm coming out, it seems to be a real throwback from the 80s, and maybe that's my perception, and I don't know if other people feel that, but it just doesn't feel right, the right language for today, and it doesn't fit comfortably. But I don't know if I'm thinking differently or what you might think about that.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. Congratulations, by the way, on your rebranding this week. But I think in terms of your question, I'm not sure, because I don't know. Recently, I've seen the drama that was on telly about It's a Sin, and the kind of the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and the concept of coming out was very real then, right? I mean, I went through it myself, right, about coming out. But it is interesting, isn't it? Because what we used to say at Stonewall when I worked there was that coming out wasn't an event; it was a lifelong process. Every time you jump in a taxi, you meet a new colleague, whatever, you've got to kind of come out all over again. So it never stops, and it can be a bit exhausting sometimes when the assumption, the default is straight. But maybe the assumption, the default is changing, right? I mean, what's extraordinary to me? I mean, I feel in some ways now very kind of out of touch of kind of modern stuff going on with students, for example, when I teach at business school, because when I survey the students, it's increasingly the case that the majority, or definitely a very large minority, don't identify as straight. And so when you've got a context like that, what does coming out mean, to your question? And maybe we'll get to the stage within our lifetimes in the very near future when actually, everyone's kind of out. It's about what does that mean, right? There's no heteronormative norm. So I don't know. At the moment, I'm kind of, still trying to be inclusive, people who talk about coming out and those who don't. I suppose it's up for debate, isn't it?
It is really interesting, because that's why I asked the question, because I toiled around in my head to ask it, but it was, and I did kind of trigger from watching the programme as well. But thank you, really interesting.
And inclusion it depends on the size of the business about how inclusive it can truly be. And you got a particular question about inclusion and size of organisation.
Yeah, for me, small businesses are, as it says on the tin, very small. So how would a small business become a really truly inclusive employer?
Yeah, that's really important, because there's an assumption, isn't there, that being inclusive takes cash or size or investment, and all those things can help. I mean, we work with AstraZeneca that's got 126,000 people all over the world, right? And they can put a lot of investment into thinking about diversity in clinical trials and HR and supply chains and everything else. But I don't think it is a given that inclusion requires cash. It depends on what your business is. Inclusion actually can be completely free. It depends what it is you do and how you do it. So if you're a small business, even if you're a micro business with 5 or 6 people, right, you've got to maybe recruit people. Well, how do you recruit? Where do you recruit? What questions do you ask? That doesn't change the cost. It depends on what it is you say. Or, you've got to have supplier relationships and contracts. What's in those contracts? What kind of values do you place on the relationships? And they don't necessarily cost. I mean, one thing that we do, and we're quite a small business, is that in all our kind of contracts, we have a guaranteed interview for disabled people. And we make that a kind of contract of doing business with us as a company. That if you want to do that, we expect you to do that too. And it doesn't cost you anything to have a guaranteed interview scheme for disabled people, but it's just something that can add social value that's at minimum cost. So I think it's really more around attitude and actually thinking about what it is in your business that you do, what you want it to be, the values, and then going beyond kind of no cost to actually how can you get genuine value. And I think, we're going into challenging economic times again. And I think in that environment, right, inclusion can be a secret source of engagement for your people, of motivation, of happiness, of well-being. And all that stuff's incredibly important in difficult times. And it comes from how you behave and how you run business. So happy to kick on ideas on that. But I think it's really important that it's more a state of being and a state of mind and attitude than necessarily an investment line.
Thanks, Stephen. If it's okay, can I just have a follow-up? It's a question around then from a HR perspective, how can HR help in all senses of the word, whether it be a large company, whether it be a small company? Where does HR fit in it all?
Yeah, I mean, in a million ways, right? But I think three obvious ones are recruitment, promotion, and retention. So in recruitment, you know, I still meet lots of organisations who use limited job boards or who just go to the same people or use the same headhunter. How can you think really creatively about massively enlarging the pool that you're fishing in? And so I think HR can play a critical role in recruitment. And then not only simply the supply side of recruitment, but actually talking to your people on how they recruit. And again, some really simple things. Like, for example, when you get CVs, right? If you can obviously, you know, ignore pictures, names, and various things that will trigger bias, and actually look at the skill sets. And then rather than reading each CV sequentially, if you can look for each skill across and read across skills, you'll de-bias the way that you recruit. Similarly, if you kind of recruit in groups rather than one-on-one. There's a ton of stuff HR can do in recruitment to actually, I think, you know, de-bias stuff and get more diversity into the organisation. And then when it comes to promotions, I think it's again about how we identify talent, promote talent, support talent. And again, you know, HR have the insights that, you know, some of them are, you know, quite fun. The fact that men tend to BS more than women in their abilities for promotions, or they tend to put themselves forward for promotion when they can do half the job description, whereas typically a woman will wait till she can do 90% of the job description. So how can we actually calibrate that bias, whether it be gender, sexuality, race, confidence, introversion, extroversion, and actually seek out the quiet, brilliant talent that actually deserves an opportunity and platform for promotion. And I think promotion is a critical way that the more kind of rigor and process HR can put into it, the better. And then retention. Again, how can we actually preemptively keep good talent? And again, diversity is critical because it's not just money. You know, it's not just the hygiene factors or transactional, but talking to your people preemptively and actually doing stay interviews rather than exit interviews. So, you know, what is it that you like about working here most? What can we do more of? What can we do less of? And actually having a preemptive retention strategy for your key talent. But there's loads. But there are three that spring to mind.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, Ian. Okay, before we're going to turn the tables, and Stephen's got a question for each of you, but Linda, do you have any other questions you'd like to put to Stephen while we've got him?
I've got one quick one, and
it's
kind of about, you talked about people having hidden characteristics, and I'm kind of conscious about people being put into boxes, but do you think, you know, having the kind of terminology LGBTQ or BAME, does that help inclusion or does it hinder it?
It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm speaking to you as a white guy, right? So in terms of BAME, a caveat that, you know, I'd ask Black folks, Asian folks, and ethnic minority folks what they think. But certainly when I talk to colleagues and friends who are ethnic minorities, they would say, well, look, you know, call us what we want to be called, or call us as we are. So, you know, the Black experience in the UK is very different to many Asian experiences. The Chinese experience is very different to the Bangladeshi experience. So I think actually asking people what they want to be called. And I'm kind of at the moment going with Black folks, Asian folks, minority ethnic folks. And so actually spelling out Black, Asian, minority ethnic rather than BAME. Because I think BAME is basically non-white, which is a little bit, you know, offensive. And then when it comes to LGBT, I mean, I suppose I'm the G of that acronym, but to be honest, LGBT now can go on to 8+ characters, right? I mean, we've got increasing, you know, diversity of sexuality and identity. And to be honest, I'm going to go with LGBT+, but the same argument would apply, right? That ultimately gay women might prefer to be gay women rather than lumped in with, you know, everyone else. So I think it depends on what people want to be called. But as a rule of thumb, I'm going with Black, Asian, minority ethnic and LGBT+. But then I'm just stand corrected if people want something else.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Megan?
Yes, I haven't got any more questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Excellent. And Ian, do you have any more?
I suppose the last point from myself was around the pandemic. It's been a tough year, I suppose, hasn't it? So has that helped or hindered inclusivity from your perspective, Stephen?
I think it's a fascinating question, right? Because, you know, we're kind of living in real time out in this real experiment that we're all in. When the pandemic kicked off, last year ago, I was on lots of panels around, isn't this amazing for flexible working? So, you know, we've been campaigning for flexible working for 10, 20 years, and suddenly the world's gone flexible and remote overnight. And it opened up this world of possibilities of balancing work and life, and you know, working the hours you want, not having to commute and so forth. But as time's gone on, I think people have thought, well, actually, that's one option. But the other option is actually, I'm working now crazy hours. The commuting time I've saved has gone into just more time online. I'm on back-to-back Zooms. I don't even schedule time to eat, go to the bathroom, go for a walk, basics. I'm just plugged, you know, to the screen non-stop. And that's not great for many reasons. So I think what's really interesting is we're kind of at this crossroads, this kind of bifurcation, this choice between, do we want to consciously make the pandemic an opportunity for inclusion, or actually are we going to kind of sleepwalk into it being a massive step backwards? If you look at gender, for example, we've actually seen quite significant regression, and we've seen increasingly like stereotypes coming to the fore, women picking up more of the homework, more of the housework, more of the child work, as well as trying to do the professional work. And so we've kind of almost had a reinforcement of gender stereotypes. That's clearly bad for women's progress and participation in the labour market. On the other hand, we've seen positives, for example, people connecting in different ways, and rather than walking to the corner office or talking to the big boss, being able to beam into people's living rooms and meet their kids and their dogs and Peppa Pig on the iPad. And I think that informality and smashing of hierarchy is a real opportunity. So I think really it depends what we want. Do we want to actually consciously include, or are we going to actually just kind of sleepwalk into this regression backwards? And I think, you know, look, it's been a heck of a tough year, and it will continue to be tough for a lot of people. We, I think, have to kind of make the best of this and make a choice out of it. You know, I hope it's increased empathy that, you know, some people are in incredibly difficult living situations, whether it's even domestic violence, whether it's shared living accommodation, whether it's trying to do your job in difficult circumstances. Others are, you know, loving their life in their, you know, rural palace. I think we've got to kind of empathy the situation, be conscious of this, and I hope choose a positive path forward, which is, you know, we can get a lot of benefits out of this tricky situation and mitigate the downsides, but only if we're very deliberate about it.
Brilliant, excellent. So, Stephen, you're undoubtedly an expert in your field, but we've got three other experts in. I'm sure you're always learning, as we all are every day. It's your opportunity now to put some questions to Linda, Megan, and Ian.
No, thanks, Rich. I mean, so many to ask. I mean, let me kick off with Linda from Meg. Linda, what does it mean to you to have a commitment to diversity?
It means about changing cultures, and it means people having a real open mind and seeing the best out of people. So for me, I suppose I look at it through a lens of culture, and the culture being the right thing, and people doing the right thing to make it equitable.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And Ian, what about HR? We talked a bit about HR already, but what specifically can HR do to support LGBT plus inclusivity in business?
I think from our perspective, it at the heart of it is about people. So, and our strapline at UHR is it's all about the people. So I think that covers the inclusivity agenda. So if you got that right, that you treat everybody with respect and the same, then inclusivity will follow. I think at the heart of it is treating the people you work with, your colleagues, those that you are contracted with in the same way, in an open and transparent and honest, and at the heart of it in a way that supports them as individuals.
Yeah, adapting to them. Yeah, it's interesting because the research shows like that transparency is really important. Transparency and leadership behaviour is kind of the biggest contributors to inclusion. So it's bang on. And Megan, how do we make employees more diversity aware generally?
I think having an equal opportunities policy to start with, but also, and that just kind of sets the standards and, you know, opposes discrimination, etc. But it's not just about the policy, it's also, we have our blended behaviours and values, and one of those is share a sense of belonging, and it's very inclusive. So making sure that we adhere to those behaviours and that people know from the start that that's kind of how we operate. Diversity training for all. We've done unconscious bias training and things like that. And just fostering an inclusive environment, really.
Brilliant. Can we come down to Blenheim and talk what we do? Yeah.
It's closed. It's so sad, but when it opens, definitely be my guest.
Stephen,
we have something to look forward to. So post-lockdown, let's all regroup at Blenheim and have this conversation.
where are you, Stephen? Whereabouts are you?
So I'm in Sussex, East Sussex.
Sussex. Well, we've depending when you're watching this, we've got a walk coming up in March. So you're more than welcome to join us. We did it back in November, and it was an excellent opportunity for everybody to get out and meet each other. And
look at that, all my good friends are by there, so I'll come along. Yeah.
You're most welcome.
Online in the meantime, that would be fine. We're all online, so yeah.
You can visit it virtually. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Linda, Megan, and Ian, for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And I certainly learned a lot this morning, and I'm sure our viewers have. And it would be remiss of me not to plug Stephen's book. He's co-author of Building an Inclusive Organisation, available, I was about to say all good bookstores, but online, I should imagine, is the main place people will be going. So it's on Amazon. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the book, Stephen?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's the latest book I wrote with my colleague Rafi, and we tried to answer the question, how do you build an inclusive organisation? So we just try to gather research that we've done over the last 20 years, plus interview loads of our clients, and put it together in a kind of how-to book. And we actually published it before the pandemic started, but actually during the pandemic, it's really kind of taken off, and people picked it up and thought, well, if there's any time we need to think about inclusion, it's now. And there's some very practical steps and things we've learned, which I hope help.
And does this embrace the findings of you have a 2020 impact report, or is that separate to the book?
That's actually a follow-on, actually. Thank you. The impact report's about, again, looking at what's landed. So working with organisations for a long time now, what's been the change over the last 5-10 years? You know, we were talking earlier on about change, you know, in LGBT rights over the last 10 years and so forth. But companies can create change too. And how do they do that? So we put together 6 examples in an impact report to demonstrate that it can be done. And here are 6 amazing examples from brilliant organisations that have done it.
Well, if you can access the article that has been published alongside this video, I think we've got a link to the report. So check it out, and certainly do visit Amazon and grab Stephen's and Rafi's book. But thank you again, Stephen, Ian, Megan, and Linda. It's been really interesting, and look after yourself and yourselves, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks
a lot.
Take care.
Bye, Stephen. Bye.